A while back, I had made a short about how inefficient the Garland was as an item for what it's designed to do. And I got a ton of responses to that video, people saying things like, well, it's super cheap, so it's not that big of a deal, and I just use it because you gotta have something in your head slot inventory thing. You know, things like that. Which go completely kind of counter to the things that I was saying in the video. And some people were like, well, you shouldn't have to worry about rot, you know? I think new players struggle with sanity more. And I just want to discuss everything about it, and for the most part just double down on why, based on the message that I was saying rather than just the example given, because I'll say it was kind of a shitty example, I'm right. So the point of the video is to outline the Garland sucks, you shouldn't make it for basically any reason other than to look pretty, and the example I used to convey that was that it was a lot more useful in the long term to let it rot if you're picking flowers for sanity. So let's start with that. Is picking flowers good? The short answer is no, but the long answer is no, but. You know, it's perfectly understandable to be picking flowers in my opinion, but it isn't great in the long term. Flowers are generally better being left around, since they can provide useful things simply by being there, including, but not limited to, spawning butterflies, of which can be killed for 8 HP's worth of healing, with each flower spawning more butterflies, the more players that are nearby. Additionally, they are required for bees to pollinate and yield in honey, which is very important for nearby bee boxes, as bee boxes are probably, if not definitely, just one of the best food sources in the game. So picking flowers has its, you know, let's say drawbacks. So what else is there to say about flowers? Picking them has its benefits in the form of providing 5 sanity each, which is fine. You know, it's one of the things where if you're in need of a quick, easy way to get sanity, like let's say you're a hit away from dying and being chased by a couple nightmare creatures, it's usually more worth it to just pick those flowers in order to cause them to de-aggro for you to get into a safer position. As far as the uses that petals have, barring the character-specific options like the cistern, the rose-colored goggles, you know, things like that, petals have some uses aside from garlands, most of which do lead back to just being turned into rot, as many of the things that you would use petals for are typically just not worth it, with the biggest exception being turf, which would just be purely decorative, and the pretty parasol, which isn't really great for the rain protection, but it is useful for what it counts as, that being an umbrella that you could give Pearl for the sake of completing one of her quests. I would also be amiss if I didn't mention what is easily the best use of petals. This is unfortunately only available 1/4 of the time in any given real life year, and that is of course the gift wrap. The gift wrap is functionally, with the only drawback being that you don't get any resources back from unwrapping it, just a bundling wrap. This by far makes it the best use of petals in the game, but you know, that's kind of niche. It only comes up once every 1/4 of the year, every quarter of a year. But let's go back, further address some of the comments that people had about the initial short. You know, the argument that it basically costs nothing is kind of wrong depending on the circumstance. The cost of the garland is the lack of flowers that occurs after relying on them long enough. Like, sure, one garland isn't really gonna hurt anyone, but once you start playing with other people, or if the ones that you're wearing rots, it becomes an issue for not only you, but everybody else in the server. Especially if someone is doing something like taming a beefalo and wants the whatchamacallit saddle, the one that requires 99 butterfly weight. Since just removing the spawn locations for these butterflies can make it even more of a hassle for the player to get them. People also say, well, it's good for new players, they can get it super easy without having to fight anything, and it gets them a way to stave off nightmare creatures. To which I say, fashion goggles exist. Like, garlands aren't the only thing that is easily accessible that raises sanity passively. They're not even the only easily accessible headgear to help with that. The fashion goggles are an item that is pretty often overlooked due to the fact that for the longest time they were locked behind summer fishing in the Oasis, but now it's just something that you can craft for the low price of 1 pigskin and 1 gold. This item goes nutso when it comes to new player accessibility, requiring 2 items that can be gathered with minimal requirement on the player's part. At most requiring them to venture out to find gold, which is something that is already inherently desirable early on regardless of who you're playing, and a pig house, if not just touchstones, both of which are good things to know the locations of in and of themselves, so it's not really something that you have to go out of your way to find. Increasing your sanity at the same rate as a top hat, the fashion goggles are a combat free item, assuming that you're not playing as a monster character, And if you are, then touchstones are still nice to find in your early game exploration. But speaking of the top hat though, the top hat itself is an amazing item overall, with its only real downside being that it requires you to kill a couple spiders or spider dens for silt. The top hat, similarly to the fashion goggles and vice versa, provide enough sanity to where if you wear them at all times, you will basically never have to deal with sanity drain from dusk and night whatsoever. Furthermore, if you're playing as Wendy, a notoriously new player friendly character, you actually won't lose any sanity during dusk and night due to her passive sanity resistance. The only thing that a Garland has over these two options is that it doesn't require a science machine to make, and there is a lot to say about just that point in particular. So the science machine allows you to prototype items and structures that would otherwise be locked, which very early game typically means making a backpack and a shovel at least. Usually you also want to pre-craft the alchemy engine as well, just to have the ability to put it down later if you ever need one of its crafts. And obviously there's the odd craft here and there. You know, some people pre-craft a chest, a crock pot maybe. You know, maybe you find gears and you prototype that. Or maybe you're taming a beefalo or playing Wilson, Weber, or Wirt and want a razor to shave some things. You know, the list goes on. But that's all to say, you prototype a lot early on. So how does this really relate to the Garland? Well, pre-science machine, you typically don't lose out on tons of sanity, and the sanity that you do lose, you can easily make back by prototyping. So if we go back and we do the math, let's say it takes you about 5 days to make a science machine. You're taking your time, or you can't find the biome that you spawn next to, you know, the mosaic one that has all the gold. Whatever the reason, you're gonna lose 5 sanity a minute from dusk and night, which takes about half a day or 4 minutes. So 5 times 4, 5 being the sanity drain per every 4 minutes, gives you a grand total of 20 points of sanity that are lost. Then you spam that over the course of 5 days, giving you a total of 100 points of sanity loss. This sanity loss is only really impactful for a small number of characters, being Weber and Wes. For the most part, every other character can just tank the sanity loss and not have to deal with nightmare creatures. But if we add the Garland's 1.3 sanity gain a minute to the mix, multiplying 1.3 by the 8 minutes in each in-game day, we get a total of 10.4 sanity each day multiplied by 5 for the 5 days, giving you a grand total of 52 points of sanity over those 5 days. On the surface, this doesn't really seem like a bad thing. You might look at it and think, oh, that's half the sanity that I would have lost, you know, that's pretty good. But we can look at the math behind crafting at a science machine and compare it to the math behind the Garland. So just given the backpack and the shovel, that are some of the first things that players would craft, you've already gotten 30 sanity from that, minus 100 from day-to-day sanity loss. Add in the alchemy engine requirements being 3 instances of prototyping for the core components, and 1 more for the alchemy engine itself, gives you an additional 60 sanity, bringing the total from crafting just the quote-unquote necessities at a science machine up to 90 points of sanity for what I would consider a generous 5-day setup. And you know, for the sake of this, we can also throw in prototyping fashion goggles or a top hat, which bumps up to 105 points of sanity, which is 5 more than what you would have started out with. If we want to go even further, the top hat increases sanity by 3.3 points a minute, which means wearing it for a day gives you 26.4 points of sanity per day. Using the 5-day example, you gain 132 sanity, offsetting the sanity loss in that time by 32, meaning you could just ignore dusk and dawn for most of the time, with the only exception being longer winter nights and longer winter dusks. This means that even if the Garland was free and you spawned with it, by the time you would make a science machine and prototype all the things that you need, it would simply become redundant. All that is to say, prototyping and making the goggles or the top hat is simply better than making a Garland. You know, what's next? What else are people talking about? I'm doing most of this off memory because I simply don't want to out any one particular comment. Like, yeah, I am kind of being petty when it comes to making this video. Basically, you know, this is me like being Danny DeVito to Matilda. You know, the I'm smart, you're dumb, I'm big, you're little, I'm right, you're wrong, and there's nothing you can do, you know the one. And yeah, you know, that's inherently petty, but I do want to elaborate on the idea behind Garlands and why I think they're bad, because it seems like it's something that I brought up but couldn't fully elaborate on in a 60-second limit. But I thought the initial short would give you a general idea of what I meant, but I could definitely have been better at communicating that. So, you know, that's on me. That's my bad. But regardless, you know, let's get to the next point, which was something along the lines of, well, you gotta have something in your head slot, right? You know, why not a Garland? Which I just think is wrong, personally. Like, it's fine to not have a head slot items if you don't have anything worth keeping there. Like, this is a common thing I see amongst the community, this quote-unquote need to have your head slot taken up by something, which is, you know, for the most part, understandable. In the average day-to-day, you typically do want something occupying your head slot, since being able to increase your sanity passively is almost always going to be desirable, with very few exceptions. Though saying that you have to have your sanity increasing headgear at all times isn't always correct, since this does take up an inventory slot if you choose to take it off, especially if it's something in favor of another hat like the miner's hat, or even armor. Because if you're going to go do something for a specific purpose, like go out and fight Klaus or something, then you typically just want to be carrying armor with you. Like, the sanity hat or whatever that you're wearing in your head doesn't really matter if you're going out just to fight a boss. But, you know, that being said, this is something that is very hypocritical. Like, you know, I'm very guilty of this myself personally, where I just constantly feel the need to wear my sanity hat at all times, but it's certainly not something that's quote-unquote optimal to do. But I digress. You know, as far as wearing the Garland goes, it's simply not necessarily to do if you're going to pick petals for sanity for whatever reason. Like, the uses outside of the Garland tend to simply be better overall, including rot, as I mentioned before in the short. But there are definitely things that should be mentioned aside from it. You know, I use rot as an example of fertilizer since it's easiest to get, only requiring you to simply wait a bit and then watch them turn to rot. But whether picking them is something that's desirable in the first place though, I'll leave up to you. But nevertheless, if you got it, then you need to know what to do with it. You know, rot is simply the most apparent use for petals, simply due to the fact that you get it naturally over time. But if you don't like waiting, then you could always feed the petals to pigs for poop, just to get the same effect. Obviously, there are alternatives to this, like using light bulbs or, you know, just grinding out beefalo for a bit. But that then becomes preference in regards to what you want to use fertilizer for. So I feel like if you do choose to use petals, then, you know, that's fine. That's a valid way to play, whatever. The aforementioned Pretty Parasol, while a bit niche, is still probably the best thing, simply due to the fact that it's more useful than the alternatives, insofar as progressing the big mainline quests go. Now comes a part where I talk about sanity gain and its options throughout the entire game. Obviously, there are things that help you while you wear them, and that's mostly just the stuff that we've been talking about in regards to, like, the top hat, the Garland to a lesser degree, and the fashion goggles, and so on. But throughout the game, there are also items that you can consume in order to regain sanity, and over time, this tends to become more and more useful to know what and where they are. And for this video, I'm just going to be covering 3 that are super useful, basically throughout any point of the game. The first and probably the most important and most popular has got to be cacti. Cacti is found in deserts and is super useful and important to know the location of, because of how consistent it is to find and get large quantities of. Whether you're low on sanity because you've read too much as Wicker, spent too much time in darkness as Winona, cacti is always going to be available for you. You know, year round, regardless of the time of day, it really only costs you a small amount of damage per each cacti you pick, but how reliable it is easily makes up for that. Additionally, the damage that you take, while still being a small amount, can be reduced by just wearing armor. And because that damage that you do take is so small, that even just having something like a grass suit or Woody's hardwood hat goes a long way to reduce tons of the damage that you take from picking them. Furthermore, if you cook the cacti and eat them, it also restores a small amount of health, which goes even further to offset any damage that you've taken just from picking them. Next up is something that's only available during dusk, which are the green caps. Green caps have the benefit of either dropping your sanity or regaining it, depending on whether you eat it cooked or raw, with the cooked version being the one that you eat to restore sanity, which is what we're going to be talking about for the purpose of this video. They aren't restricted to one biome, and they can grow in mushroom planters, but you're also fine just going by someplace like a forest, deciduous biome, or really anywhere where they just are plentiful, and grabbing a few when you need them. The last one is probably the least talked about one, but taffy is an amazing item that can be made with 3 honey and 1 filler in a crock pot, and provides 15 sanity. It has the benefit of being made with what is probably one of the best food sources in the game, that being honey, and every character can eat this, making it really easy to stock up on the resources and really reliable to just make whenever you're in need of sanity restoring items. You know, TLDR, honey's really good, taffy's just an added benefit to it. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about the topic, I'm not gonna lie. You know, the TLDR is obviously that Garlands kind of suck. Like, their uses become irrelevant way too quickly for them to really be useful. And the alternatives are available at such an early point that there's just not really a reason to use anything other than those alternatives. Which I think the Garland as an item is an interesting case study in regards for tools for new players, where just because you can make something in this game doesn't necessarily mean that you would benefit from making it. This is the case for quite a few things in the game, like the rainometer, the thermal measurer, you know, where the benefits that they provide simply aren't worth the materials that they're built with, because by the time they actually warn you about anything, you're already in the thick of it and have to deal with them. This might be something that's viewed as unfortunate, or something that you think shouldn't be the case, but regardless, it's the cards that we're dealt with, and it's something to consider. Obviously, some people might find the Garland more useful than others, whether that be because you're playing a particular character like Weber and do take those 5 days to get set up. You know, maybe you're Wendy and you could get away with using worse sanity items because you're giving all the resources to teammates, or, you know, whatever the reason. There's probably a way to rationalize using the Garland, but generally speaking, it does fall off super quickly, and it isn't useful in the short amount of time that you do use it. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to rant about. Obviously, don't be mean to other people, you know, especially in my comments or whatever. It's just rude. If you see somebody using a Garland, then don't be an asshole about it, for lack of a better term. You know, just tell them like, oh, hey, there's this cheap alternative that we could use instead of the Garland that I think you would really appreciate, you know? Don't call them a loser for using a Garland or anything like that, dude. Like, just chillax, you know? But yeah, I don't mean to call anyone out in particular or anything like that. I just want to clear up what I mean and what I think in regards to the Garland as an item, because I do think that the initial short was kind of lacking in a thorough explanation, but you know, I guess that's on me for trying to make it into a short instead of like a full-fledged video, which, like, you know, I do want to get some householding things out of the way as far as like the content goes. So, you know, this video in particular, I feel like it's very easy to interpret it as being made just out of spite, which, you know, I'm not gonna admit, a tiny part of me is kind of like, you know, a tiny part of me is kind of feeding into that, because I do think that the Garland kind of sucks, but I fully admit I didn't do a good job of explaining why in as much detail as was needed for a topic like this, where you just kind of have to say that something's bad. Now, or as far as other audience interaction goes, I feel like I'd have gotten quite a bit of, you know, people complaining in the Winona video, which a lot of people take issue with the video of being titled like, oh, the best Winona main. I can't believe this guy's calling himself the best Winona main. How egotistical, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, sure, I get if you wanna go that way, you can, but for me, it's always been an issue, or it's always been a matter, rather, of being a joke in the community, where I am one of the very few people who have consistently mained this character and who have played this character. So the running gag has always, to me at least, been I am the best Winona main by default because nobody else plays the character. Which, you know, I probably should have included that, and you know, I should have probably put like, oh, the best Winona main, parentheses, by default, talks about, you know, whatever. But this just makes for a better title. As far as this video in particular goes, the feedback that I got was really just focused on the subject matter, which is why I felt like I needed to elaborate on the subject matter itself, what I meant, and what the details are. Especially because, in this case, it's something that you could, like, very easily delve into, whereas with the Winona video, if I want to straighten myself out, I could just tack it onto a video like this one, and kind of, you know, give context to the bit. But regardless, I think that this topic is kind of interesting in regards to what people value out of an item. I do feel like the Garland generally is kind of bad and kind of falls into the category of being a noob trap, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Garland is completely useless. It just means that the use cases in which you would prefer to have it are a little bit more varied and need to be considered a little bit more carefully, rather than just saying, okay, well, I have the stuff to make it, I might as well make it. But that's all I really wanted to talk about. So until next time, bye-bye.